Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Kansas City-based playwright, author, and artist Olivia Hill. She is a survivor of child abuse, poverty, and sexual trauma. Her mental health journey has been a long but successful one. She lived in interior Alaska for over 13 years, with the majority of that time with no indoor plumbing. Her current project is a personal memoir called Travel North Black Girl. 4 of her plays have been produced and performed in over 5 states, including New York and Washington, D.C. Enjoy this interview.
Thanks for taking a minute out today.
Sure, no problem.
So, are you up in Alaska?
No, I'm here in Kansas City.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I know on the description it said Alaskan, so I was just trying to... So, okay, great. Yeah, so you're here where I'm at. Wonderful.
Yes, I should say that I'm back in Kansas City. Yeah, I grew up here and went to Alaska in my early 20s and stayed there for a little over 13 years.
Okay, I just interviewed a musician from Chicago yesterday that did a gig up in Alaska and just was raving about how wondrous it is up there and how lucky he was to be able to have that opportunity. So it's interesting. Alaska must be rotating in the cosmos above me.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think when it starts calling you, you will hear it from everywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking a minute out today. And I want, before we get into your life as a playwright, author, and artist, I want to know, how did you do during the 2 years primarily of the COVID shutdown, and how did that time change you?
Well, COVID, I think, hit us all with a surprise, but, I stay pretty engaged with the news, that sort of thing. It's just sort of one of those weird little hobbies that I ended up developing after being in Alaska. But I think it hit us all pretty hard, and it hit me and my family hard. We were more prepared in the sense that, it's funny how the events in your life will prepare you for things. I was raised by grandparents, and they came from, the time when there was nothing, they were that era of save everything, use everything. So I ended up doing okay. My kids and I kind of hunkered in. I have a generational family here. That's how we live. My grandson, my son, and my daughter. And we ended up fixing up the downstairs basement, remodeling that by hand, doing some gardening, so we pulled in and just became kind of, inner reflective, and we got through. Unfortunately, that's the good side of it. The bad side of it was that I was one of those early victims of COVID. So ended up with all of the symptoms and sickness before we had any vaccination and before we even had any tests in order to find out for sure. I have asthma, so it hit me pretty hard. And from my perspective, it was pretty touch and go for a while. A couple of times I thought this was it, but I didn't tell my kids. I really struggled really hard. I couldn't lay down, couldn't breathe laying down. It was pretty rough. And I had long haulers, so it lasted well over 9 months before I could even get back to just walking around the block, let alone doing hiking like I like to do.
I'm always curious about somebody that's well-traveled, that, has grown up in this town that I know. I've been here my whole life, and left and come back. What was that like for you? How did you appreciate or look at this town differently after leaving and coming back?
Wow, I think, and you're right, when I left here and ended up in Alaska after 13 years, I eventually ended up in New York and the D.C. and the Maryland area. And so coming back, first of all, I had been back and forth. There's 7 generations of my family in Kansas City. So I had returned as much as I could during the time I was in Alaska. And that was interesting because it had taken me about 3 years before I really came back after going to Alaska. And that experience was odd because, the last leg of the trip was always a smaller plane, and that smaller plane was filled with people seemingly from Kansas City, and I could just feel it. I just knew that they were. During that time, that was the early 80s. I didn't see a lot of Black people traveling with me during that time. And so it was an atmosphere that was familiar, distant with the people that were on the plane. But then coming back here and settling here about 5-6 years ago, it has changed in many ways. In many ways, of course, it hasn't, because we're in a time in this country where the head of oppression and racism and sexism and ageism and every kind of ism that there is has reared its ugly head. But one of the things that's more powerful to me about coming back is the art scene. That's really incredible to me. And it's not doing bad on the front of food either, which, I am a creative in all of those areas. And that was really powerful for me. The other thing is that I had a lot of fear in coming back, concern about reliving so much of the trauma in which I sustained in living in Kansas City and Missouri in the Midwest. But as I slowly acclimated myself and moved around, there's a lot of difference. And I think part of that difference is that people are coming from all over to live in Kansas City. And that intermixing of culture, people from different geographical areas, starts to slowly infuse itself in its worldly mentality on a smaller area like here. And so I think that makes all the difference in the world. But the art scene is amazing, and I was shocked, because, growing up here, for me, I wasn't considered or seen as an artist. As a matter of fact, discouraged. I remember talking to someone about going to the art school here, and I was so excited I wanted to apply, and was told basically you won't get in. It's not for you, and so I just sort of let that go. But I discovered so much more when I got to Alaska that I ended up going to school to be a chef, and I went to school, for theater and for playwriting, and as well as visual arts, and have my degrees in those areas. So I am a true creative and artist through and through. Can't do anything else.
If you were in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day and one of them looked up at you and said, "What do you do for a living?" how would you answer them?
I would answer them by saying, what I do is the thing that I'm meant to do. And I've always have been a creative in some sense of the word. I did not understand that could mean that I could make a living at it or be accepted at it. But I think, first of all, I think that we have a tendency to push our children towards something that we think that they should do in order to make a good living, as my grandmother would say, financially. But the reality is that we are all shaped and made to do something. There's something internally in us. If we were to really flourish and grow, then you have to tap into what's already there. You got to mine that part of your spirit and your soul that is calling you, because it's not only just about what you could do, right, that could financially support you and support all the things you want to do. But if you're killing your spirit and your soul all along, you're not going to sustain yourself or anything, and you'll lose it. Over a period of time, you can only throw so much garbage and stuff on top of and suppress who and what you are before it either just sort of dies out and you're just sort of this empty soul running around. So, I would say to them that what I do is what's internally in me. I am a creative, and I use that to communicate to the world a part of my humanness and the spirit that's within me, to share the human and the living experience here on this earth. And so I seek those things that allow me to be that creative, whether it's through theater as a playwright and writing those kind of play scripts, or as a visual artist, and that creativity goes across the board. My training as a printer, relief printer, doing woodcuts and linoleums and etchings, that sort of thing, or a watercolorist that I taught myself to do before I even got into art school. And now I also just sort of make whatever I want, whether it's jewelry or, working on a piece of furniture or that sort of thing. So I think that if you're true to yourself, I would encourage kids to not let anyone discourage them from their path. Because if you're true to yourself, you'll be a whole self.
So let's go back to your childhood. Talk to me a little bit about how these seeds of creativity were planted in you and have become who you are.
Wow. Well, I didn't find out until, many, many years later that my mother had been an artist. My mother did not raise me, but my biological paternal grandmother and father did. And I didn't know anything about her. And so, there was a thread that ran through me, and my siblings. So when I was a kid, my older siblings were the artists. I had my oldest sister had did a mural in Kansas City as part of some project when she was in high school. And my brother was quite the drawer as well and was lifted up as being the artist in the family. And I sort of was a sleeper artist. So no one really paid much attention. I was the kid that, showed the picture and it's like, oh, that's sweet, and then found it in the trash later, sort of thing. And so I didn't really think of myself as that. I was probably pretty crafty. We had very little growing up. My grandmother was raising 4 grandchildren. My father was her only child, and she was already at that ripe age of, going through the change, menopause, and she was an amazing cook. That was the one thing about her, is that and I came from a long line of cooks. My grandfather he owned a little chicken shack off of Purcell, about 47th and Purcell, and when I was a kid growing up. And so they were great cooks. My great-grandparents I knew until I was like 13 years old. And they were also, farmers. They came off the farm. So there were layers of things that influenced my creativity. One of them was that my great-grandparents and my grandmother, they came off of farms. They did things like canning and preserving. But my grandmother also was a gatherer. And she was also what most people would call now a healer. She just simply knew plants and herbs, and she would gather and use those things in order to heal us when there was no money to go to a doctor. And so she did. And so, the art of doing that stuck with me as well. And so all of those things filtered in somehow. There's something about looking at the generations if you have the opportunity. And many, Blacks in America don't have those connections, even to great-grandparents, let alone grandparents. I was blessed to have that and to be surrounded by a lot of elders within my family with knowledge of the art of healing or gathering or canning and preserving food, as well as just being a creative. She was very artistic in how she used very little to decorate the home or take care of things. And so, I've often said that I was going to have a T-shirt that says, I was the daughter and granddaughter of Make Do and Jimmy Rig. And so that informed me by the small things we had. If there were scraps and leftover pieces of construction paper from school, I was asked if I could take those throwaway things, and I brought them home. If there were small little things, lids to jars that I found, I would use those things to make things. And I would sit hours on the floor in my room that was shared with two other sisters and just make things, If I had an opportunity, I had a brother-in-law later on that used to, his sister and him bought the greenware, and he was showing them to us, and I would paint them for him, these fine details on the work, and give them back to them. So, that was the sort of creative process for me. And one of the strongest creative process, which is why I mentioned, my grandparents, great-grandparents coming off the farm, was being in nature. So I didn't have a real clear sense of what that meant because, we lived in Kansas City in the inner city right off of 39th and Bell Fountain. And in that community, like most inner city communities, there's very little green areas. But there were our backyards and the backyards behind us. And for me, it was like being in nature, Our house next door, the house that was next door to us, grew up in these sort of wild brambles and limbs and trees overgrown, and it was just an adventure for me to do that, and did not know that there was a calling for me to that sense of wildness and nature. And a lot of my art form took on that, finding things, interesting pieces of wood or small stones or whatever it was. But it drew me in right from the beginning. And later, I think that was a part of informing me not only in my artistic bend, but to be willing to go someplace like Alaska.
All of us as artists are motivated by the things that we've seen or experienced growing up. What was it for you? What album, what painting, what book? What is it that really parted the curtains for you that made you think, wow, this is something that not only I love, but I'd like to create something like this one day?
Wow, that's a complex question because, we're taking these sort of tiny steps every day that becomes cumulative, right? And so there were a lot of things early on. Like I said, my sister and my brother was an artist, but I wasn't really viewed as one, and I watched them. And when I would see a piece of work that was drawn, and there were small other things, being a part of a school system that was not a great school system, but one of the things I remember very young is being taken on a field trip to the Nelson Art Gallery, right? And trying to understand what materials they were using in a painting and how did it get there. I mean, my earliest memory was going to Mary Harmon Weeks Elementary School and being in an art class and having materials just put in front of me that I could use. And that was one of the biggest impact. And then it goes on from there, those small accumulative things. When I finally met a woman, a Jewish woman, that came into my life at one point, and probably this was in about 83 or something like that, or 84. But she had really imbued upon me, and this is before I went to school for art, artists like Kathy Colwitt, which did a lot of work in black and white that I love. I love the image of black and white. And she did a lot of drawings and things that had to do with the common man and doing times of poor people that were struggling, the downtrodden. And I was just mesmerized by the storytelling in those works and how she spoke to, through images, what suffering really felt like, what being empty of spirit was, and how it showed up on the faces of people, or even hope at time, or the pleasure of some small thing was all there. And it was very powerful to me. I've come to, going to school, see lots of great artists, but there were artists all around me in Kansas City, people that were never, would never be known their names, that were powerful artists that came and went, and their songs are not song. And music is a great, motivator for me. It was then. I'm not grounded in music in the sense that I can talk about different artists and styles in a sense of influence and that sort of thing, but it was powerful to me. So I was always someone that was a bit of an enigma in my family and in my neighborhood. I didn't really quite fit. And one of the ways is that early on, where everyone was really, listening to funk or R&B, that sort of thing, I had gravitated to hearing certain jazz artists, and I know you do a lot with that, and I was very interested in that. And so I would just pick up pieces and hear someone playing something, and early Herbie Hancock, and I heard a little bit of Coltrane, but I grew up with the blues, and because I had grandparents, and so the blues colored everything as well. It colors how I write, those notes, that movement, that moody, dark, colors, all of those things. So art was really all around me in that way, and it would be easy to talk about the great artists, but I think that there are great artists that live next door to us. We just don't bother to pay any attention because they have not reached a status, only because we have not put them there. And we have not opened up and allowed for the greats to become the greats in that sense, and they die out. So, yeah, I think that is truly the biggest influences, is all those things. There's great artists everywhere.
So who would you consider a hero or a role model for you?
That's a good one, too. I've thought about this many times over the years. There are many writers, musicians, movie, television personalities that I admire. I admire their work. Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, a lot of music, some of the music that sticks with me, John Clemmer. I could go on with various people, but I admire the work that they do and how they can reach in and speak to your soul and a part of you that is crying out to say something. and no one's listening, but they'll do it for us. But I have to totally admit that my heroes were those around me, those people in my community, my neighborhood, those people, some that were not in my neighborhood and reached to care for someone. My heroes are neighbors, grandparents. In spite of the harshity of some of that reality, they were there. They stood the ground. They endured a great deal that they endured and had to try to find some capacity to care for others. And I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of neighbors when I was a kid, growing up, would help someone else. My grandmother was one of those people that reached out and would do something to someone when we had very little ourselves. She used to always have a saying that if I got a dime, you got a nickel. And, and those things came at a price. There was a lot of ugliness, but they were my heroes. People that can keep putting one foot in front of the other and weighed down by shackles and unfairness and fear, but continuing to move, and that goes across race. That sense, those are my true heroes. The rest I admire. I admire the work that they do, and and that's really, I think that's really the thing for me.
So what's been the best fan letter or response you've gotten from your work?
Oh my God, I've gotten a lot, actually. Let me think. The best. I've gotten one that actually this particular fan letter spoke to me. Is two different fan letters, and I think that they have basically been the kind of letter that I have received. And one of the letters that I got said to me, or the person spoke to me and said, and also wrote it as a review. And they said to me that it started as a question: how were you able to capture yourself, these painful experiences, and show up, with clarity to share with society exactly who you are, not hiding behind anything and still having that voice, because they struggled to do that in their own work. And yet I know their work, and the work is extremely powerful. Someone I respect a great deal. And I said to them that, over a period of time, I think one of the reasons of how I was able to do that is that I had been working on this process not only for a long time, but I had a mentor. Her name was Pat Monahan. She was a professor at the University of Fairbanks, and she became a good friend because I was an older student, and we became good friends. And she had said to me one day after reading her work, I had been in her class for a short period of time. I was going to school to be a chef, going through their culinary program, and she had said to me, listen, I want you to read this person, that person, the other person. And about a day or so after, she had given me this list of books and people she wanted me to really take in and read. She said to me, I changed my mind. Don't read anyone. My concern is that you will be influenced by those authors and just emulate them. She says, just keep going. keep going because I think that you have a unique voice and it's going to take you somewhere that all of the reading of this material won't. It'll just confuse you, so I did. But a part of that caveat is that she had a class that I had to do, and my skills, my remedial skills, were terrible. And so she said, well, you know, I can't really keep you in this class, but I see talent in you. So if you will take a remedial class with my class, I'll keep you in here. 6 months after, she asked me if she could, a couple of months actually after, she asked me if she could send in a piece of my work. At that point, like I said, I was set on culinary school, so I'm like, sure, whatever. And she did, and it was published 6 months later. And that started the whole lining me up to go in that direction. So when we talk about a note from someone, all of it comes together because of that. Because of being able to be alone in yourself and wrestle out these truths and to become fearless like the people in my community, in my family were, to face things in spite of. All of those things came together in order for me to be able to speak earnestly. So when he said to me, you know, asked me the question of what exactly, you know, do I do or did I do, which I thought was a great compliment, because he then went on to say to me that I inspired him to do better work, to be able to show up when he hasn't been able to show up in himself, to write the work earnestly from his soul as a human being, you know, lifting up all stones and be able to say what needs to be said. So that was really powerful for me because it was spoken from the truest part of himself. I love transparency and honesty. The second was a young woman that came to a book festival that I did in Maryland, Gaithersburg, Maryland. And she came up to me and she said, her mother came up first and said, you know, my daughter's really frustrated. She doesn't, you know, she's not able to really get to talk to any of the authors. And, you know, she was disappointed at this book festival. She thought she would. Young African-American teenager. And so I said, well, bring her over. And she brought her over, and we sat down in the back of the table, and we just had a long conversation. And we had a long conversation about what it means to be a writer and what it means to be first a person, you know, and how you be able to deliver the experience to all humanity, because all of us make up humanity, all of us. And to have a piece of it missing is to not tell all of the pieces of humanity that makes us what we are, the good, the bad, the indifference. And so she later, before she left, asked me if she could give me a hug, and she said, and she thanked me, and she said it meant everything to her, and that she wouldn't give up, and she would keep writing. And that meant a lot to me, to know that I moved her in a way where she had began to have doubt and wasn't sure. And she was being sort of guided away from the idea that, you know, it's not like we make a lot of money unless you become the Toni Morrisons or the Bell Hook. And I wouldn't say that they're rolling in dough or Bell Hooks were, either one of them were. But on the other hand, you know, we call on the artist when our souls are sick. We call on the artist, you know, when our spirits are lifted and we need to dance. We call on the artist when things seem hopeless, but we push them aside. We shove them in the darkest of corners. We don't feed them or give them anything when we don't need them. And I think that we need to realize that art of all forms and those that are willing to sacrifice and give over their calling and their life to humanity all need to be lifted up and heard for the sake of the soul of humanity.
That's very well said. Olivia, where is the best place for anybody out there that wants to see your work, to purchase books, anything related to your world? Where's the best place for them to go?
Well, I'm about to go to the Kansas City, Kansas Book Festival, so I will be there if they want to meet me in person. I will be there at that book festival. It's coming up on the 24th, if I remember correctly, and I'll be glad to sign a book. I'll be glad to talk to people. You know, I do enjoy that. Other than that, you can order your book online from any of the outlets. There's, of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, all of them. But I always encourage people to go to your local bookstore. They will get the book for you or have the book. Kansas City Museum has my book. They are there. We have Round Table Bookstore in Kansas City, Kansas. They have the book there. We have a lot of local bookstores. I am truly a believer in the small, the underdog, artists supporting artists, collaboration. So I first ask you to go to your local bookstore, and if they don't have the book, tell them to get the book. You know, so there are a few of them, you know, in the area that is carrying the Green Door in Kansas City also has the book, and I'm trying to remember all the different places. Wise Blood has the book. So, yeah, those are some of the places that you can get the book. Come out and see me and in Topeka, Kansas for the book festival out there, the Kansas City, Kansas Book Festival, and I'd love to talk to anyone that wants to come out and sign the book and get the book. And, of course, you can always go to my website and find more information about my scripts that I do. I've been a playwright for many, many years, much longer than I was writing a book, and have a huge body of work. Won the Lorraine Hansberry from the Kennedy Center for my play, Mother Spence, and they can find me on oliviahillwrites.com.
Beautiful. Olivia, thank you very much for taking time out today. Good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Hope to talk to you again sometime.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.